Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 22 of the $1 Million Ideas podcast. Hi, Ken. How are you doing? How's life?
Good.
Good. Well, it seems like we're experimenting with formats again as we start the new year. I wanted to ask you about that. If we were to give ourselves a retrospective over the last couple of months doing this, we have fun recording these episodes, but any sort of like learnings or things that you've seen from the channel, people who have watched certain types of videos and people who haven't on our own channel?
Well, I think I watch a lot of YouTube podcasts, and I think we're still figuring out our positioning. Like, why do people watch us? Is it because they're going to learn something from us? Like, are we specialists in something? Or is it just that we come up with interesting topics and there's learnings from that? So I think we're still figuring that out. And I think like chemistry is not bad, and they probably think it's interesting, but I think we're still figuring out, like, it's not clear to them why are they going to watch us every week.
Exactly. And I thought that would be a pretty good topic to talk about this week as well, right? The topic of both positioning. When you're thinking about positioning, it's applicable to anything. We're talking about a YouTube channel, but it can work with your business. It can work with pretty much any content that you create. Like, why should someone listen to you? Why should someone read whatever you have to say? And I think like it's a really big differentiator. There are lots of channels that we perhaps subscribe to, which have now talk about, like when I think about Tim Ferriss's podcast, he talks to a wide variety of interesting people on a wide variety of topics. And I still listen to him, but I think like, once you get really, really big as Tim has got, like, then I think that you can go wide. I think in the earlier sort of like ways, it's about like picking a positioning advantage that you have some sort of like edge in as well. Because if you can't do that, then it's getting much harder to create content and stand out anyways. And if you don't even have that edge, then if you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel, it just becomes so much harder.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I thought about that a little bit. And so where I think we're a little bit positioned, and maybe it's interesting and defensible, I don't know how big the audience is that Southeast Asia traditionally to me is this, like, you have a lot of large corporates, you've got a lot of tech companies that are funded. The entrepreneurs that are out there, the glitzy thing has been these VC funded tech companies, right? There's not many people out there in Southeast Asia that are talking about bootstrapping and just creating a profitable business. So that's where I think we have some positioning, and maybe there's some audience like latch onto that, but that's
Yeah. Asia has always been like underrepresented. We were on a call yesterday. We were talking about the same thing. There are certain sort of like media channels and places that have built a following, but nothing that has really gone deep. And I think like a lot of being an Asian founder as well, a lot of Asian founders, especially in the bootstrap world, tend to keep to themselves, don't tend to do a lot of press and stuff like that. And they just do it. I remember this guy came on to MFM, My First Million. And have you watched the episode with Syed Balki? He's the guy who owns everything in the WordPress sort of like zone, fully bootstrapped, and God knows makes hundreds of millions of dollars and on the WordPress ecosystem. And it was really cool. Like, he at least got like connected with Sean and Sam and all of that stuff. But, the Zoho guy in India and stuff like that, like they don't give as many sort of like circuit talks and on all of these things, but they're absolutely crushing it as far as their businesses are concerned.
Yeah, I think there's some correlation there that if you are willing to bootstrap and go through that pain, it takes a while, and it's like people are gonna almost look down on you for a while until you actually make it. And so a certain type of personality can survive that and excel eventually. And that type of personality just doesn't need to like jump on a lot of podcasts, right? Whereas like the VC founder who like is losing a ton of money, but raised a huge VC round and like they've got a big ego. Like they're the ones that like get on every podcast under the sun.
Yeah. It's all like marketing game. So I thought, well, like what we could do today is give people a little bit more idea about like these frames that we're talking about. And I like to use the word frame when we're thinking about like at least YouTube channels or this, because it's a structure which is relatively predictable on a more meta aspect as to what is going to happen so that the audience is well aware of what's happening. And as that, I think, frame becomes clearer, and it goes through that whole beats like, there's enough curiosity in it, the audience is clearly defined, and it's definitely enjoyable, or you learn something or something happens in the frame that do it. I remember, like, forget about YouTube channels first, like there were all these TV shows, whether it was Crystal Maze or Back in the Day or even Survivor, when you think about it. Did you ever watch
Yeah.
Survivor?
Yeah, a long time ago. Still on, right? Like, I was watching it like when it first came out.
But when you think about Survivor, right, it's like relatively like the similar sort of like angle. It's like these people, like in MrBeast games, he used it individuals and he used it on the individual basis and like blew it up. And that's why I think like the past also has really good examples of frames that were very, very popular and people will always remix. I think one of my favorite videos, if people haven't watched it, I'll link it in the show notes, is this thing like everything is a remix. I don't know whether you've seen the video, but it's this old school video which just shows everything is built upon something in the past. And yeah, so let's talk about frames. And I'm going to go from, the highest subscribers downwards. And we can sort of like try to understand why. So here's MrBeast. I think he is the highest sort of like subscribed channel on the internet. And the frame's pretty straightforward, right? When you think about it, it's like, I think like he started this off. Naturally, he didn't get to this frame automatically, but back in the day, he was like trying a whole bunch of different stuff as with Minecraft and things like that. But I think if anyone has watched his old videos, this is all testing. And then I think he lands on it. What would be interesting is like to find his first video where he actually ran a game. Anyways, ultimately, I think he reached the frame, which was like doing these challenges with people. And I think it started off small and it's got to where it is today, which is absolutely insane with the show and things like that. So, what do you think about this frame? Like, if you were to explain MrBeast's frame, what would it be?
I think it holds a lot of parallels to the old reality TV shows. And one anecdote I just want to say, I used to have these two friends that used to create reality TV shows in Russia when I was there in '06. And yeah, there were these concepts that they would buy from abroad, license them for Russia, and they just kind of work. And I don't think what he's doing now, especially with Beast Games, is that different from that. But, he's one of the first that kind of took it and applied it to YouTube. Plus, he had this angle where I think he really resonates with kids. And I think when you ask a kid and you ask an adult, why do you watch MrBeast? You get two very different answers, right? Like the adults will say like, oh, there's these interesting kind of like psychological, you know, things going on between people. No, whereas kids will probably have a much more simplistic answer and somehow his content resonates with both at the same time.
That's the core, right? Like, if your frame has a wide audience, which can easily get vested into the frame, understand it, and enjoy it for a variety of purposes, like those are the best frames then, because your content goes far and it's difficult to do. And I don't think like the other ones that we're going to start talking about, you'll see like the frame ultimately will become sharper and smaller as to, the subsect of people who watch it. For instance, like this was crazy when I was researching frames as well. Like, this person sort of like does these 5-minute crafts, but, it's like these videos which have like all of these crazy things that you can do. You've probably seen videos like this on Facebook and things like that. But the whole deal is like, they get a ton of views for all of their videos. They have like a set of subscribers that, is 81 million. Like to give context, this is 346 and this is 81 million. But again, like the deal is like, all right, these guys get this 5-minute craft sort of like thing. I guess the internet really is looking for creative things. And I think like the segment which targets kids on YouTube is huge, as some of the largest channels on YouTube are kids channels. That this frame also works. Like at least like everything from the title to the video and things like that actually just makes it very clear as to what these people do.
Yeah. And I love that you're confining it to 5 minutes. Because I have a feeling the problem that they're solving is like, okay, either I'm a child or I'm a parent with a child and I'm trying to like figure out something quick to do. I'm not looking for some hobby that takes me months to get better at. Like, just need to kill the time. So I think they're just positioning it really well. It's kind of like in my head, a similar thing would be like the 99-cent stores. I'm walking into that store not expecting to buy some like fancy thing. I want something quick, and I think that's part of what's happening here.
I think like, when like you can see some of some of their oldest videos is 119 million views. These are just crazy, right? So obviously the channel now has evolved. We saw some of their other videos were definitely the all right. So their most viewed video is 397 million. Having gone through just seeing like a 30, 40 million episode where short even with Startup Gag, I've seen firsthand what this can do. And these guys have like knocked it out of the park several times over here. So these are category defining, right? Like once they figured this out, and I don't even know like how old this video is. Like August 24, 2021. All right. So it's 3 years old to give you some sort of like insight into that. But, they found that one. And I think if we go back and try to find, like, this is 7,400 videos. MrBeast is 842 videos. So these guys are definitely, well, 5-minute crafts and they're much cheaper to make. But it just shows the volume required also. All right, moving down will be like, we talked about like the majors over here, millions of subscribers, and we'll just come down to another one that I subscribe to, which is All In. I'm definitely missing David Sachs on the show, but from my perspective, this frame was like four friends come together to discuss global events. And it was always interesting to hear their points of views because they're not in consensus all the time. And I think that was the frame. If someone was to ask me what's All In, it's basically four people from the technology sort of like world commenting on global events.
Yeah, exactly. I've watched it 6 or 7 times, and 3 times they had a big guest, like, I watched one with Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and stuff, but, a number of times they were just talking amongst each other, and I still found that interesting in that, like, they're all, you know, well-regarded guys, successful, with a lot of opinions, and hearing them kind of discuss and provide their point of view, I think is
I think like leading up to the election, they had like everyone on it, right? RFK, Vivek, Elon, Tucker, and Trump himself. But I think like the whole deal is like, I mean, we could also do a channel on commenting on global events, but I don't think anyone would want to hear our point of view, frankly, on this specifically as global. And I think like you have to be at a certain stage, you have to have a certain sort of like personality, background, evidence that people care about your opinions. And I think that's what gives them the positional advantage. There's some that your background gets to you, right? So MrBeast and 5-minute crafts obviously sort of like built that over a period of time by figuring out that sort of like advantage, honing that skill, and ultimately sort of like getting to those videos over time, which is perhaps the organic way how to do it. And the quantum of videos required to get there is also much higher as you are experimenting a lot more. But again, like, when we're talking about frames, this was a frame. We're going to talk about like lots of our subscriptions over here. I know we have several. Like Lex doesn't necessarily like have that background of those four guys, but he manages to get like, world class guests on the show like all the time. If I was to provide a frame for this, it's basically long form, deep conversation with important figureheads in the world, trying to do that in as much of a unbiased point of view as he can.
Yeah, Lex, I watched Lex for probably for a couple of years, and I just watched the Zelensky interview, and my wife's Ukrainian, so it's of course, resonates a lot. But I think Lex is evolving. Like in the older days, I used to see him as okay, he's like this MIT grad who can be quite technical, and I like the way he thinks, and he brings in these niche experts from these highly technical fields that are often very, very smart. So that is how at least I had him positioned in my head. But lately he's blown up, so he's got, the politicians and Jeff Bezoses of the world. So shum, now his position is changing in my mind. And I like in some ways I almost think it's bad because I think like a lot of people are converging on the same thing. It's like I'm an interesting interviewer with access to Donald Trump and these other people. And I think what's unique about Lex is like I think a lot of the other interviewers won't get, Zelensky, or I think he's gonna be interviewing Putin soon. So that's like, this super elite class that he's somehow made it into.
Yeah. And it's access now for him. Also, like when we look at the subscriber numbers, it's 4.5 million, right? So this almost ranks in the top after this in terms of that. Like that's a lot of subscribers. People view this like, when Zelensky comes on and just in 2 weeks it has 4.8 million views. It's distribution of the message, which is critical. And yeah, I think like that makes a big difference. But I think like you're right. Like this is what I was talking about. Like as someone starts with a certain frame, there are two ways that you can go. You can double down on the frame, just like MrBeast, if that can blow up, and the core audience is big enough. So, like you said, like kids will watch Beast games and adults will watch them. But a Lex Friedman dense podcast on a technical concept or with a strong technical founder or a person from the field will have a much smaller sort of like audience grab to it. And if you have to figure out like his opening up the funnel on the top is basically he got a couple of hits. We can see like, when we think about like the videos, like, it's like 19 million views and all these views, these blow the channel up. And then ultimately that just creates a widening of the lens. And then the problem is what you face right now, which is like even Tim Ferriss or anything like that. They get these people on, they have these conversations. But after a while, almost all of the conversations sound like the same conversation then.
Yeah, yeah. I felt that like I watched all the Trump podcasts before the election, and they were interesting, and I was learning more about Trump because I hadn't paid attention to him for a while. But like they did all feel the same, and so like some of these big characters who just do the circuit of all the major podcasters, like you lose some of the value of your podcast, the positioning. And so I like that's where I think Lex is going to struggle a little bit. So he goes from like Musk and Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson to like some guy I've never heard of. And he does that a lot. It's like, what do you stand for? Do you stand for, having Trump on and Zelensky, or do you stand for this like super niche, technical person?
And, and yeah, and I think that's important because then the frame starts to break, right? And when the frame becomes confusing and you can't sort of like pigeonhole it to a certain degree, which is not a bad thing when you're thinking about creating a channel over here, your audience is just going to waver as well. And you'll lose audiences over a period of time. Whereas some of the guys who are smaller, so you introduced me to this guy, um, and his sort of like, he's young himself and he's getting all of these very young founders on. So that's what I think. Like, if I want to know what, you know, the Gen Z founders and all are doing right now, this is the podcast for me to
Yeah,
watch.
it has that clear positioning.
Yeah. And I think like he himself has a background in the space as well. I think I haven't checked out a lot of his own stuff. I like the fact that when you introduced me, the fact that, I was watching these kids, I was like, damn, like, they figured out how to do TikTok, they figured out how to scale certain sort of like systems. And as he sort of like narrowed down on that niche, I think that's probably going to be what keeps him apart. Because I think if we just scroll back over here, it was only like, he doesn't produce videos at the rate at the other guys. It's not as constant. But he tends to get these younger sort of like generation on now versus to stuff that he was doing like, you know, a while back. It also shows like an interesting sort of like progression from him, right? Like 2 years ago, do this to 100x your productivity, to this 17-year-old's making 500K, to, Discord's whatever, 200 million growth over here. Like, I think like people are always refining, and he hasn't created a lot of videos over here, but has a lot of subscribers. This is pretty crazy that 2 years ago he created this. This was obviously early and caused the channel to blow up, right? Then we keep on going into this niche, which both of us sort of like naturally what we're listening to is a lot of individuals who get. And I think what differs about Lenny's podcast versus everyone else is the fact that when I think about Lenny, it's what the podcast says. It's like a, a deep podcast with product leaders primarily, and not so much growth. But I look at this and so then when he gets people like Graham Beaver on, who I've heard before, I think this breaks the frame a bit. But I think like this episode with Nick Beer was like awesome, as you can clearly see with the number of views. But I think like, yeah, this is another podcast I enjoy. I think the deal with this podcast is when you talk about like dense podcasts with product leaders, it's, the number of subscribers is awesome for that segment, but I don't think it like blows up unless he goes wider, as maybe this is indicating.
Yeah, I think he's had some guests that definitely attempt to go wider. But then I just think he's a little bit too all across the map. Like, you got people talking about culture and then other entrepreneurs and other. So, like, in my mind, the only thing that's consistent about Lenny as opposed to other people is he represents to me now the old school world, in some, like, the old school tech world. And I don't even know if that's completely fair, but like, he has the people that are from the Facebooks and the Googles and from the big companies and talking about how product and tech works in these companies. And so for me, that's like old school. And then like the new school guys are the Greg Isenbergs and the Brett Malinowskis and stuff.
Yeah, and so Greg has blown up. Both of us have been following his channel for a while. I was following it when he launched the podcast with Sahil, when it was called Where It Happens. And I remember them launching this 3 years ago. I think like then they just, I don't know, had a falling out, and he kept this channel, and I didn't realize they went for as long as they did. But I think what's interesting looking back now is that even all the stuff, Sahil was pretty still big during this time, but they never really blew up even back then, right?
Yeah, I never knew Sahil was on here because Sahil shows up as a guest in many places. He's big on X and whatnot. Like when I first started watching Greg, I feel like it was like well under 10,000 subs. And he'd already been without Sahil for a while.
Yeah, yeah. So this is like we're going through. So it's two, like even getting Andrew Wilkinson on and both of them on, like, that's 3K. So it just sort of like shows to me that, first of all, like, okay, 2 years ago, Sile still has blown up on Twitter, has a lot of followers. Greg is following, Greg, not so much, but definitely getting there. And then Andrew is also in that pod with Sean, Sahil, all of these guys like blew up during that time. And what is really interesting for me to watch is like, one, I don't know, like, why you need a digital detox. It may not be something which I don't know appeals to everyone, but the fact that I wonder if they repost videos like this today with better thumbnails and with the distribution they have, whether it does better. But it comforts me to to the sense that, hey, like, regardless of how big your Twitter followings are or stuff like that, if you don't understand the foundations of probably thumbnail, well, the frame correct, getting the right content, thumbnail, title, all of these things, it, regardless of how big you are, it's just really difficult to grow on YouTube.
Yeah. And I also think one frame that I use is you have problems that rich, successful people have. And then you have problems that like the people that are trying to get there have. And some episodes, and I see that happening here, is like digital detox and what do you do to make yourself happy? And like these are the problems like that like the rich successful people have. Like the people that are like hustling trying to get there, like they don't need to like watch videos about that. Like they need to watch videos about how to get there. And I think that's just a much bigger audience. And I think like a little bit of what was going on there is that, probably Sahil and Greg were already doing all right and they're making videos for themselves, but they don't really represent.
What's interesting now is like, if you see this, he is changing the channel up. This is 1 year ago, October, a little more than a year ago, October 18, 2023. He says he's going to change it up, but that was that point. And now we can clearly see, like, things are getting better in terms of views. He has like this new frame now that he started that year ago, which was like, hey, I'm going to start talking about like ideas. And I think he started to rebuild the channel in the sense that, I think he started to get better with the thumbnails as well. Started to go to what you were just saying, like, all right, he was getting better with how to do the thumbnails and also how to get there. But I think he's got much, much better over time when I think about this, which is like, how to make 10 million, but how to monetize. These are doing well, building a business. But then I think he gets this Cody episode going and it just goes mega viral in from his perspective, and a few 30K plus a month. So now it's sort of like gone down. Even our channel is like called $1 million Ideas. But I wonder whether mm, getting that $10,000 idea per month is like more tangible. When you think about like making 1 million, it's still like a stretch. But yeah, I think he did this. Thumbnails adjusted, color became a lot more standardized. He really took this month sort of like thing that he took from this headline, and then you start to see it a lot in a lot of like places where it's like 1 million, 100K, sort of like thing. And then, yeah, it just started to take a life of its own. Views started to move up. And then these are the very tangible sort of like things, right? How to build a faceless YouTube channel in 72 hours. You can clearly see it's one of his like better ones in the channel. And then I think like he was quick on the V0 bolt replit sort of like thing. And there you have it. Like, I think we can see the progression of frame narrowing and repositioning until he got to where he got to. It was good to at least talk through this and for us as well, right? Because, like, what do you take away from just watching all of that stuff with those guys? Any big takeaways?
I think thinking about and being very clear about who's your audience and why they're gonna watch you, right? And like this last example of Greg was a good example of that, where it's like you saw him evolve to this frame where this is how to become successful without having much background in AI, right? And make a lot of money. And that is a problem that probably a lot of people have, right? Whereas a lot less people have the more like soft touch and feeling problems. So that's what I get out of it. It's like, all right, know who's your audience, why they're watching you, and what is the concrete value you provide to them. And just be consistent to that.
First of all, I think the big takeaway is that this thing takes time. And as more and more people discover the platform, I was talking with a friend of mine, and I was saying, like, a popular YouTube channel is an asset that you just can't like, okay, a faceless channel is probably something that you could probably buy, but with your brand or something, a YouTube channel which is popular is an extremely valuable asset to own in this age. It's not something like, just because Andrew Wilkinson, he has a podcast now as well, just because you're super rich or have access doesn't naturally give you sort of like the ability to rise up in the views as much as you think it could. I mean, you could juice videos and things like that, but then, ultimately engagement will drop. So it takes time. Success is sort of like more predicated on what is it that your frame is, like you said, who's your audience, is it very clear? And then doing that over and over again. I know there's another guy that I was watching, and all his videos are, he takes the biggest internet marketers and breaks down their funnels. Have you watched these videos?
Just playing guy.
Like,
Old guy.
I forget his.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
And he just breaks down the full funnel. He's like, okay, this goes here, this goes here. He maps it all out, and he does that. And again, like, I haven't been to his channel in a while, because again, that's like a very niche sort of like audience as well. So funnel builders, and be like, all right, how do you build a funnel? How do you do this? I think it's definitely probably a smart way also to start with, where your audience is relatively niche, and then you sort of like build into that, get the things right. And then, as we are seeing with all the other guys, whether that Lex or Lenny, once you get to a certain scale and size, then you have more optionality as it opens up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like what I've seen with social media that I think you don't realize its power until you do it is that it's all about finding these bigger hits that have these long tails. Like that is what provides growth. So, getting something viral or semi-viral is the key. Like that's the story that, the vast majority of successful channels is like, I was dead until I had one viral hit. And then that just kept the long tail of growth coming in. And, and then you keep adding more and more of those like roots.
All right, cool. This was fun. Maybe we should do $1 million frames instead of $1 million ideas. It's like, hello. Well, actually, I think it's the same thing. Ideas and frames are somewhat similar. It's just how you position the idea, which is the frame that we were talking about today. But this was fun. And for people who watch this or subscribe, I hope that you don't mind too much as Ken and I explore this year and experiment and see what works, what doesn't work. And you guys can come along with the journey with us. And yeah, that's about it.